Hey there, Python trainer Reuven Lerner here. And today I want to talk to you about a special built-in in Python that's really useful called range. So let's first talk about how we can iterate over a bunch of different types in Python. So we can iterate over a string, and I can say for one item in ABCD, print one item. And what happens here? Well, the for loop turns to the object here, to ABCD, and says, are you iterable? The answer is yes. And so the for loop says, okay, give me your next thing, your next thing, your next thing. And we get A, then B, then C, then D, because strings know how to behave inside of a for loop. Well, what if I say here for one item in 10, 20, 30, 40? Print one item. Well, same thing. The for loop turns to the list and says, are you iterable? The answer is yes. And so the for loop says, okay, give me your next thing, your next thing, your next thing. And the list gives it 10, 20, 30, 40. Each of those is assigned to one item. We run the loop body. So what if I'm in a really great mood because, I'm teaching Python today, and that puts anyone in a good mood, I would think. And I say, for one item in 3, print hooray. And this fails. It fails miserably because the for loop turns to 3 and says, are you iterable? And the answer is no. Now, you can think this was a bad design decision. You can think all sorts of things, but this is the way it is in Python. In Python, you cannot iterate over integers. As it says here, this int object is not iterable. So what can we do instead? And the answer is range. I can, and this is sort of the simplest way to think about it, I can say for one item in range 3, print hooray, and that works fine. Now, what's happening behind the scenes, we're going to talk about that in a moment. But just so you understand, if you want to execute something a certain number of times, you run the for loop on the range with a number, and you get it, and it runs that number of times. Okay, that's the simple starting point. But range is, as you can tell from my not so subtle hints here, range is way more powerful than that. So let's start off with, what do we get from range in each iteration? And let's check it. I can say for one item in range 3, print, and we'll do an F string here. We'll say one item, colon, hooray. And look at that, we're getting numbers. We get the numbers starting at 0 up to and not including the number we say for range. So when we use range n, we get each of the numbers from 0 until and not including n, which means a total of n numbers, right? Because if I say range of 3, I will get 3 numbers, 0, 1, and 2. If I say range of 5, I'll get 5 numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll never reach that endpoint that I stated, but I will get that number of iterations. So that can lead to some confusion off by 1 errors. You have been warned. So if you want to run on this range and use it for indexes, you can, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You can even do something like this. You could say here s equals ABCD, and I can say here for, let's say, index in range len s, print, and we'll say here s of index. Oh, well, it helps to actually put them in the curly braces. Otherwise, it's kind of boring, right? And look what we get here. We get ABCD. Well, what's going on? Well, the len of s is going to be 4. Len of s is 4. And remember, the length is always going to end up with one more than the total length, right? So s has indexes 0, 1, 2, and 3. All right, and then I say range of len s. So what I have here is range of 4, which means we'll get indexes 0, 1, 2, and 3, which matches up perfectly. And then we get each of the elements of s printed out for us thanks to that f string. So this is like what I would say is 60, 70, 80% of how people use range. I want to execute my for loop a number of times. I'll use range on that number. I'll iterate that number of times, and maybe I'll even use the index that I get each time. But range actually is way more powerful than that. So first of all, we can call range with 2 elements. And then it's the starting point and ending plus 1. So if I say here for one number in range, and let's say 10, 15, print one number. And look, once again, it's going to start at a certain number, go up to and not including. So this is from 10 up to and not including 15. And here you have to calculate how many items you'll get. I mean, it's not that hard, right? 15 minus 10 is 5. But it's not as obvious because the endpoint does not determine how many elements you'll get. So if you call range with 1 argument, that's the endpoint plus 1, right? That's the number of iterations we'll get. If you call range with 2 arguments, then you get from, up to, and not including. So 10 up to and not including 15. But I can do this, of course, with all sorts of things. I can say here, from 308 until 322. And it'll print out all the numbers from 308 up to and not including 322. So you can really do this with any numbers you might like. I mean, if you make them really big, then you might be waiting a long time, but do that on your computer. I'm not going to do that on mine. So we have a 1 element and a 2 element, or 1 argument and 2 argument version of range. And they're both designed for the same thing. I want to go through a numeric range of some sort. By the way, you can imagine it doesn't have to be necessarily indexes somewhere. For example, maybe you're interested in looking through all the usernames on your system or user IDs on your system, starting at 500 and going up to 10,000. Right? You don't necessarily want to check the numbers under 500. On many Unix systems, those would be like special accounts. You might want to go through each of the department numbers in your company. Right? There are all sorts of places where you might want to use range, where you know there's a starting point and ending point, and it doesn't necessarily start at 0, but you do know where it's going to end. Well, there is a third version of range as well. And range with 3 arguments is start, stop plus 1, and step size. Which means, so if I say, let's just do this, for one number in range, and we'll say here from 20 to 30 by 2s, print one number. So this means from 20 until not including 30, and then a step size of 2. What does that mean? It means each time we're going to increment our number by 2, not by 1, which is the default. So we have 20, okay, add 2, 22, add 2, 24, add 2, 26, add 2, 28. Oh, we would get to 30, and it's always up to and not including 30, so there we stop. So these are the 3 basic ways that you can use range. With 1 argument, 0 until that number. 2 arguments, first number until not including the second number. 3 arguments, from the first until not including the second, step size of the third. And the step size obviously defaults to 1. Now I want to show you a few other sort of cool tricks you can do with range. So we can count backwards. If I want to, I can say for one number in range, and watch this, I'm going to say here, 30, 20 minus 1. Print one number. And what's going to happen then? Well, it's going to start at, from 30 until not including 20, step size of minus 1. So every time we iterate, we're going to remove 1. We're going to add minus 1, 2 things. And so we start at 30, we get to up to and not including 20. Of course, I can do this as well with a step size of, say, 3. And it's going to be 30, then 27, then 24, then 21. Now, just make sure that if you do have, negative step size, make sure that the, first argument is bigger than the second one. Why? Because if I say for one number in range, 20 until 30 by minus 3, print one number. The good news is that this will finish executing very, very quickly, because it will immediately say, oh, wait, I've already gone past the target. Let's just stop here. The other cool thing that you can know about range is if I say R equals a range from, let's say, 100 to 100,000. This is not actually creating a list of all those elements. Back in Python 2 days, it did create a list, and that could use up an awful lot of memory. But here, it's just sort of keeping track of where it is right now behind the scenes. And so this range object that I've created, R, I can iterate over it, but I can also query it. I can say, hey, R, what's the number at index 5, 4? And I'll say, oh, that's at 154, which kind of makes sense, right? What's the index at, 987? Well, it's going to be 1087, and so on and so forth. So you can, I've never had occasion to use subscripts on a range object, but you should know that you can. In fact, if I just print the range object, I'll see it prints out the start and the stop just like that. All right, I hope that this helps you to better understand range and how to use it. I always want to hear your questions, so contact me. Get me on Twitter, on email, and don't forget that I have free weekly articles about Python in my Better Developer newsletter. I'd love to have you subscribe. I'll be back soon with more videos about Python. Thanks for watching.